Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review for you all, so hopefully find this one interesting. This movie is an action film from India, Hindi language English subs, released in the year 2023, directed by Nikhil Nagesh Bhatt, and this film is called Kill. So Kill is about a commando who is in love with a woman that is going to have an arranged marriage. So she's travelling on a train to Delhi in order to have this marriage, and he wants to interrupt this marriage because it's the love of his life. And she loves him, but unfortunately it's this woman's father that's arranged all this. And so he gets onto this train to Delhi in order to try and stop this marriage from happening. But unfortunately, along the way, they realise that some bandits are also on board and they're taken over the train. And now this man's love is in trouble, and it's up to him to go on a one-man killing spree in order to save the day. So whether or not he can is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Kill. This movie has been hyped up beyond belief. A lot of people absolutely love this film. A lot of people are comparing it to the Indonesian film The Raid. People saying it's the Indian version of The Raid. When I saw the trailer I thought, alright, this looks interesting. Indian cinema is not my speciality. I've reviewed a few Indian films, but Bollywood, every time I think of Indian cinema I think of Bollywood. I think of the colourful dancing, the extravagance, and it's really not my cup of tea. But there are other Indian films that have actually interested me, and I've been fairly impressed by them. And so Kill is another one of these films that stands free of the extravagance of Indian cinema and the stereotype sort of Bollywood, and so I thought I'm going to give this one a shot. Now I've seen reviews on YouTube, everyone's saying it's the best action film of the year, that you have to go out there and see it. So I had my reservations based on the fact that it's so overhyped, but I was hoping that it would live up to the hype or at least be entertaining. And after watching Kill, I will say that it was entertaining, but unfortunately this is a victim of overhype. This is a movie that is very much overrated. I know that's a very unpopular opinion. I'm probably going to get some hate for saying that, but you guys know I'm brutally honest. Pushing aside the fact that the choreography and the action, and it's a very brutal film, there's not much else going for it, and that's something I'll go into a little bit later. But what I like about this film, there is very, very violent, and the action set pieces are fairly well choreographed, and so that's something that I like. Production wise, this is very competent. I thought the acting, for what it was an action film. It didn't require great performances, but they do a decent job. I thought the main character, this commando, the one-man killing machine, as he's going through, you can sense that he wants to protect the love of his life, and he's going to go from one carriage to another, and there's going to be a body count. And so the body count does rise to really ridiculous lengths, but that's the type of movie that it is. It's a ridiculous type of Arnold Schwarzenegger-like action film where you have the suspension of disbelief, you leave your brain at the door, and you just revel at all the carnage that is being put before your eyes. And so the whole film has that sense of The Raid from Indonesia, where you've got that action hero that you can really root for, and it is caricatured in a way that it's very cartoonish violence. But it is a very, very brutal film. A lot of people saying for Indian standards this is a lot more brutal than what they're used to. But for me, I've actually seen a few other Indian films that have a lot of disturbing violence in them, but this movie is definitely the cathartic violence. It's the therapeutic violence where you're actually marvelling at these horrible things happening to these horrible people. But what I also like about the film is that these henchmen of the bad guy were actually acting as though they were real humans. So when one of their friends dies, they're actually mourning their death. And so I thought after a while the table started to turn. You've got the main guy that you really root for, but at the end I started to feel a little bit of sorrow for the bandits. And that's because of the realistic responses to death and the carnage around them. And so they're starting to second guess what they're doing, and this is where a little bit of sympathy is thrown into the bad guys. And so that's something that I wasn't expecting. I was just expecting mindless violence, and that's for the majority what you get. But you have touches of humanity that's thrown in there that I thought were a welcome addition. And so it is a little bit different where you start to sympathise for the bad guys, and you're starting to flinch at the violence. The violence gets to a point where it's becoming evil, and the destruction of the violence, you'll feel as though no one's going to come out of this a winner. And so that's something that I liked. I wasn't really expecting that. And so the movie doesn't take long to get into the action set pieces. That's something I liked also. It knows exactly what it wants to do. It wants to entertain an audience. It wants to hit you with action set pieces. And so it doesn't really waste time in it getting to the base of what this film wants to do. But unfortunately, the biggest issues to this movie is that as far as action is concerned, it does get a little bit repetitive. So you got one carriage to another carriage to another carriage. So it's a very familiar setting. And this is the problem I had with the Raid 1. The Raid 1 I absolutely loved, but it was a similar setting throughout the whole film. That's why I believe that the Raid 2 was a lot better, because it actually took place in multiple sceneries. And so if you got that one setting, the problem is it starts to become a little bit of deja vu. And that's exactly the problem with Kill, is that you see some violence and you're becoming desensitized to the violence because it is very, very frequent. But because it goes from one carriage to another, I just felt as though it's deja vu, deja vu, deja vu, and it started to get a little bit tiresome by the 3/4 mark. And so that's something I really didn't like. And so yes, you have impressive choreography, although it's not as good as the Raid choreography, it is impressive, but after a while I started to think I want something else, and I really didn't get that other thing that I was hoping for. And so what I was hoping for is that extra elevation to actually maintain my interest, to kickstart my interest again, because it was getting a little bit tiresome by the time the movie finished. And the biggest problem I had with this movie is the melodrama. Now this is a problem with a lot of films, in that you don't have the character development, so you have to make the audience feel sorry through very obvious methods. And so in this film you have the very sad music, you have people looking really glum, the overacting at the sorrow, overacting, okay, we know that you love this person, but we don't feel it, we just know it because you're telling us. And so because we don't feel it, because the characterization isn't that good, it's forced to use melodrama, but it doesn't work, it's laziness. And so when I had the sad music that was cued, I thought it had to hold your hand, because if no characterization, you don't get the feeling to it, you don't get the relatability to these people. So it cues the sad music, it cues the overacting, and this is the problem I had with this movie, is that it does become a little bit ridiculous. And so yes, it is an action film, but the melodrama I felt was really out of place, and that's something I really didn't like also. And so apart from, the deja vu and the melodrama that's thrown into this film, I thought as though it was a decent film, but it's definitely not the movie everyone's going on about. I don't share the love for this film. Whether or not you feel differently, it's up to you, each to their own. If you feel as though you love this film, please feel free to share your opinions, but I respectfully disagree. I feel as though this is an incredibly overrated film. Yes, it's very, very violent, yes, it's very stylish, but apart from that, it doesn't really have much else going for it. The one setting of the train, I thought it was a little bit lacking in imagination, and it just started to become very repetitive by the time it finished. And at the end, I will say that it's a decent action film. You can marvel at all the brutality, but unfortunately there's not a lot of substance behind it. And as I said, action films don't need substance, but they need that continuation of the elevation in order to maintain your interest, but unfortunately it just doesn't have that. So overall, for Kill, it's not a bad film, but not a great film. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.